The coffee shop, usually a blur of morning faces, froze around me. Sharon across the counter took Mitch's hand, a casual, intimate squeeze for all to see. My latte grew cold, untouched, as the barista's pitying glance pinned me to the spot. Mitch's eyes met mine, a flicker of triumph, then a whispered, "She deserves better." The afternoon sun, low and weak through the bare branches, painted long shadows across the driveway. I pulled my truck in a little before 5, a good hour ahead of my usual schedule. The meeting had wrapped sooner than expected, and I pictured a quiet evening, maybe catching the end of a basketball game before I had to get ready for the business dinner downtown. Then I saw Linda Jensen's older sedan, parked a little too close to the garage door. It was the same car she'd been driving since high school, a dark blue Ford Taurus with a faint dent above the rear wheel well. A small line formed between my brows. I let myself in, the familiar click of the lock echoing in the quiet house. The air smelled faintly of something baking, maybe cookies. I walked through the living room, past the kids' scattered toys, and into the kitchen. Linda stood at the counter, a plate of what looked like gingerbread men in front of her, wiping flour from her hands with a dish towel. She looked up, her eyes wide, a slight flush rising on her cheeks. Sharon was nowhere in sight. "Dale," she said, her voice a little higher than usual, "you're home early." "The meeting finished up," I told her, setting my briefcase by the back door. "Where's Sharon?" Linda glanced around as if Sharon might materialize from behind the refrigerator. "She asked me to watch the kids for a bit," she offered, then hesitated. "Said you both had plans for the evening." I didn't get a chance to respond. Sharon appeared at the kitchen archway, dressed in a black silk top and dark slacks, her hair pulled back neatly, a faint shimmer of eyeshadow on her eyelids. She looked ready for a night out. Her eyes, however, showed a flicker of something close to panic when they landed on me. The color drained from her face, leaving her skin looking pale. A coldness settled in my chest. It was a familiar feeling, one that had been visiting more often lately. "Plans?" I asked, my voice even. "That's news to me." She hesitated, her gaze darting from me to Linda. "Just a work dinner," she said, her voice strained, trying to sound casual. "You know, with the new project." Before I could press her, the doorbell chimed, a bright, insistent sound that made Sharon jump. She moved quickly, almost a reflex, heading toward the front door. "I'll get it," she said, her back to me, her pace quickening. I followed slowly, my footsteps muffled on the thick carpet of the hallway. I reached the living room archway just as she opened the door. Standing on our porch was Mitch Anderson. He wore a charcoal gray suit, crisp and expensive, a bottle of wine in one hand, a small bouquet of white roses in the other. He didn't notice me at first. He leaned in, his smile wide, and kissed Sharon on the mouth. Not a peck, but a lingering touch of lips. The air in my lungs felt suddenly thin. Sharon pulled back, her eyes flicking past Mitch to me, a fresh wave of alarm washing over her face. Mitch turned then, his smile fading when he saw me standing there. "Anderson," I said, my voice flat, holding his gaze. He cleared his throat, adjusting the wine bottle in his hand. "Miller," he returned, a forced politeness in his tone. "Didn't realize you were here." "Clearly," I said. I looked at Sharon. "Work dinner, you said?" She clutched at the lapel of her silk top. "It is," she insisted, her voice tight, a defensive edge rising. "Mitch and I are discussing the quarterly projections." "You're not going anywhere with him," I told Mitch, my eyes still on him. I didn't raise my voice. Sharon whipped her head toward me. "What are you talking about? Of course I am." She reached for a light wrap draped over the banister, her fingers fumbling with the fabric. "Don't be ridiculous, Dale." I stepped forward, putting myself between her and the door, though I didn't touch her. My gaze never left Mitch Anderson. "You need to leave," I said to him, my voice still low. "Now, or I'll be showing you out myself." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, the screen dark. He knew what that meant. Mitch's face tightened. He looked at Sharon, then back at me. The muscles in his jaw worked for a moment. He shifted his weight. "Sharon, I'll call you," he said, his voice softer, clearly not wanting to escalate. He turned, walked off the porch, and got into his waiting car, the engine starting with a low rumble. I watched until his taillights disappeared down the street, then turned to Sharon. She stood frozen, the wrap still in her hand, her chest rising and falling quickly. "This is your choice, Sharon," I said, the words coming out slower than I intended, each one heavy. "You want to fix this? We work on it. You want a divorce? We get one. There's no middle ground here. No dating while you're still married to me." She didn't respond, just stared at me, her eyes glistening. I walked past her, picked up my briefcase, and headed for the garage. The business dinner felt miles away, the thought of polite conversation and forced smiles suddenly tasting like ash in my mouth. The streetlights cast long, yellow smears on the wet asphalt when I finally got back. Well past midnight. My truck engine quieted, leaving only the hum of crickets. Linda's Taurus was still in the driveway, a fact that settled a knot in my stomach. I pushed open the front door, the house silent save for a low murmur from the kitchen. Linda sat at the kitchen table, a steaming mug cradled in her hands. The faint scent of burnt coffee hung in the air. She looked tired, her eyes red-rimmed, but she straightened a little when I walked in. "Dale," she said, her voice barely a whisper. She went. I didn't need to ask who she meant. I walked to the counter, pouring myself a glass of water from the tap. "And the message?" I asked, my voice flat, already knowing the answer. Linda swallowed hard. "She said to tell you she'll do what she wants." I took a long drink, the cold water doing little to quench the dry ache in my throat. I looked at Linda, her face etched with a mix of sympathy and fear. "Linda," I said, making a decision that felt both sudden and inevitable, "I need you to stay here tonight, until she gets back." She nodded, her eyes wide. "Of course, Dale." "In the morning," I continued, my gaze steady, "I'm filing for divorce. A lawyer will contact Sharon with my new address. I won't be coming back here." Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. She just looked at me, her expression unreadable. I turned and walked upstairs. The house felt hollow, the air heavy with unspoken words. In our bedroom, I pulled an old duffel bag from the back of the closet. I packed a few shirts, some jeans, toiletries, enough for a few nights. Each item felt like a stone dropping into a bottomless well. This wasn't just a trip, it was an exit. The weight in my chest wasn't just sadness, it was the heavy stone of an ending. I moved to the kids' rooms, the hardest part. Billy was sprawled on his back, a leg thrown over his Star Wars blanket. Susie was curled tight, her stuffed bear clutched under her chin. I stood there, watching their even breathing, the innocent rise and fall of their small chests. A raw ache tightened in my throat. I pressed my lips together, hard, fighting back the sting in my eyes. This was the consequence. This was the canton. Downstairs, Linda was still at the table, her hands clasped. "I told her, Dale," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I truly did. I said you wouldn't stand for it, not with the kids. But she wouldn't listen. She just got in her car." I nodded slowly, the confirmation doing little to ease the cold knot in my gut. "I appreciate that, Linda," I said, looking at her. "It doesn't change things, though." I paused, the words forming in my mind, hard and unyielding. "I'll be seeking full custody of Billy and Susie. There won't be any kindness left in me for this." Linda's shoulders slumped. She looked away, her gaze fixed on the steam rising from her coffee mug. "Good night, Linda," I said, the words cutting the quiet air. I walked to the back door, grabbed my duffel bag, and let myself out. The click of the lock behind me felt like a final, unyielding punctuation mark. I got into my truck, started the engine, and drove away from my home, away from my marriage. 14 years earlier, I had driven a beat-up Ford pickup back into Youngstown, Ohio after 8 years in the Army. I joined up right out of high school, a kid from the industrial fringes of the city, looking for something more than a factory line. I'd found it in the explosive ordnance disposal unit, learning the intricate, dangerous dance of bombs and demolition. I came back a man, hardened and focused, an expert with a skill set few others possessed. The Southern Ohio mining industry, booming then, snatched me up fast. The money was good, better than anything I'd ever imagined. I bought a small house, paid off my truck, and watched my savings grow. The mines were brutal work, dark and dusty, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and diesel. But there was a stark honesty to it, a direct correlation between your effort and your survival. It taught me self-reliance, a belief that I was the only one who truly held my fate in my hands. I had made a mistake once, years before, a regret that still pricked at me occasionally, a choice I thought I'd put behind me. It was a lesson about consequences, about collateral damage. I learned to build carefully, to secure foundations. Then I met Sharon at a 4th of July picnic. Her bright laugh and easy smile a stark contrast to the grit and grime of my daily life. She felt like a promise of something gentler, something stable. The temporary apartment felt sterile, quiet. It was a single-bedroom unit above a storefront on the edge of town, sparse and impersonal. I'd signed the lease quickly, needing a place. The paperwork for the divorce and custody had been filed the next morning, as promised. The lawyer, a man named Henderson with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, assured me everything was in motion. Sharon was served the papers 2 days later at the house. I was at work, deep in a mine shaft, supervising a blast. When I emerged, covered in dust, my foreman met me with a grim face. "Your wife's here, Dale," he said, his voice low, "and she's not happy." She stood in the foreman's office, her face blotchy, tears streaming down her cheeks, smudging her mascara. Her voice was raw, a mix of fury and disbelief. "How could you, Dale?" she screamed, her words echoing off the concrete walls. "After everything, to just leave and do this?" I stood across from her, my hard hat still in my hand, the dust settling on my clothes. I kept my voice steady, calm. "This isn't about revenge, Sharon. This is about Billy and Susie, their stability, their future. I want full custody. You can have the house, the car, whatever's left, just not the kids." Her mouth gaped, then snapped shut. She tried to say something, but only a choked sob came out. She spun on her heel, pushing past my foreman, and stormed out, leaving the smell of her perfume hanging in the dusty air. Devastated and feeling cornered, Sharon turned to Mitch Anderson. He was there, a steady presence, offering comfort, a shoulder to lean on. Their connection, born of a clandestine affair, now deepened under the weight of my legal actions. Linda, caught between her sister and me, tried to mediate. She called me, her voice soft, pleading. "Dale, she's not doing well. She's scared. Can't you just talk to her?" I listened, but my resolve remained firm. I pictured Sharon's face that day in the office, the anger, the entitlement. It was not fear, it was fury at losing control. Henderson, my lawyer, laid out Sharon's financial vulnerabilities in stark detail. "She hasn't worked a full-time job since Billy was born. Dale, relied entirely on your income. That puts her at a disadvantage, financially speaking. It gives you leverage." He didn't have to spell it out. I understood the unspoken implications. My own youth had been a hard road. My old man worked 2 jobs, a steel worker by day, a welder by night. My mother cleaned houses until her hands gave out. There was no easy money, no handouts. Everything was earned, paid for with sweat and grit. That upbringing had carved a deep-seated independence into my bones, a belief that you got what you put in. I remembered my first real financial venture, a small sum from a summer job, invested in a local property REIT. It wasn't much, but I watched it grow, slowly, steadily. It taught me the power of foresight and patience. Sharon, meanwhile, had begun to work the local community. She called mutual friends, painting a picture of a heartless husband abandoning his family, leaving her destitute. She sought sympathy, tried to turn opinion against me. I heard whispers, saw averted gazes at the hardware store, but I held fast. While she talked, I quietly gathered evidence. Receipts, emails, timestamps. Small details that painted a clear picture of her absences, her growing connection with Mitch, her neglect of responsibilities at home. Mitch, feeling the increasing pressure of a messy divorce, started offering Sharon financial assistance. Small amounts at first, then larger. It complicated the settlement, giving her a temporary cushion, but it also tied her further to him, a debt she might not have wanted. My resolve to seek full custody only solidified. Her choices, her dependence on another man, her public display of outrage, it all screamed instability. The children, I believed, needed a solid foundation. Sharon, feeling the walls of her world closing in, began to resent Mitch's limited support. He wasn't prepared for the full weight of her unraveling, and his initial ardor began to cool, replaced by a growing aloofness. I thought about that mistake again, the one from my past. It was a bad business deal, a partnership that went sour, costing me a significant chunk of that early investment. It had taught me a harsh lesson. Trust your gut and don't let emotions cloud your judgment. I wasn't going to make that mistake again. The first court hearing was set for the following month. The date loomed, a stark marker in the unraveling of everything I had built. The emotional and financial stakes for everyone involved had just escalated significantly. The courthouse was a gray, imposing structure, its halls smelling faintly of old paper and dust. The first court hearing was a tense, clipped affair. Sharon's lawyer, a sharp woman in a tailored suit, painted me as controlling, rigid, and unforgiving. She spun tales of my demanding nature, my supposed emotional distance, framing my actions as a calculated abandonment rather than a reaction to betrayal. Sharon sat beside her, eyes downcast, a picture of wounded innocence. My lawyer, Henderson, responded calmly, systematically. He presented the evidence of Sharon's infidelity, starting with Mitch Anderson's porch kiss, moving to the records of their frequent communications, then to the more damning fact that she had left the children with Linda and gone out with Mitch after I had found them. He argued that her initial disregard for the children's care that night, her insistence on pursuing her own desires over familial duty, demonstrated a pattern of neglect. Custody of Billy and Susie quickly became the central battle. Both sides made strong claims, framing their arguments around the children's best interests. Sharon's lawyer emphasized her role as the primary caregiver, her emotional bond. Henderson highlighted my stability, my financial provision, and the undeniable fact of her recent behavior. Sharon, watching the evidence unfold, the carefully cataloged details of her actions laid bare, seemed to realize the depth of my anger. This wasn't just a simple divorce. It was a calculated move, a surgical strike. She saw it then, the cold purpose in my eyes. She probably called it revenge, but I saw it as justice, earned and necessary. Henderson had begun targeting her assets, showing how her choices were financially irresponsible, further tightening the vice. Mitch Anderson's involvement, once a whispered rumor, became glaringly public through the court proceedings. News traveled fast in a town like ours. His professional standing took a hit. Clients became wary. His personal life, already strained, fractured under the scrutiny. He started looking more uncomfortable each time he appeared in court, which was mandatory. Linda approached me one afternoon outside the courthouse. Her face was drawn, her eyes pleading. "Dale, she's really struggling," she said, her voice low. "She didn't think it would go this far. She made a mistake." She paused, then added almost reluctantly, "But I know she made some poor choices. I tried to tell her." I just nodded, acknowledging her words but offering no comfort. I leveraged my business acumen, my years of navigating contracts and budgets. Henderson, under my guidance, meticulously dissected Sharon's financial claims, proving her reliance on my income, her lack of independent financial planning. Each detail chipped away at her credibility, making her seem more dependent, less capable. Sharon, feeling the pressure, began to make impulsive decisions. She spent recklessly trying to maintain an image, further weakening her legal position. Each impulsive act became another bullet point for Henderson. I remembered my wedding day with Sharon years ago. The sun had been shining, the church filled with friends and family. She'd worn a white lace dress, her smile radiant. We had stood at the altar, exchanging vows, promising forever. I had believed it then, truly believed in the future we were building. The contrast with the bitter reality of the courtroom, the sterile air, the legal jargon was a gut punch. The children, Billy and Susie, started showing signs of distress. Billy became quieter, more withdrawn, his usual boisterous energy replaced by a watchful silence. Susie, still young, had more nightmares, calling for me in the middle of the night from Linda's house where she and Billy were staying. A pang of guilt, sharp and swift, went through me each time I heard about it. But I hardened myself. This was not just about me and Sharon. This was about their future, their stability. My resolve for justice, for a secure future for my children, remained firm. Mitch Anderson, increasingly wary of the fallout, began to distance himself from Sharon. His calls became less frequent, his visits rarer. The legal battles were messy, public, and affecting his reputation. He was cutting his losses. Sharon, feeling abandoned, turned her anger on Linda. "You're siding with him, aren't you?" I heard her scream on the phone one night, the echo audible from Linda's end. "You're just like him, always judging." The rift between the sisters grew wider, deeper. Then an unexpected offer landed on my desk. A large demolition project out of the state, a complex job requiring my specific expertise, a temporary move to Wyoming. It was lucrative, significant, and would solidify my resources. It also presented a strategic advantage in the custody fight. It showed stability, capability, and an undeniable commitment to providing for my children. The shifting earth beneath my feet was beginning to settle, albeit in a new, unfamiliar landscape. The new demolition contract in Wyoming was substantial, a complex project that would keep me busy for months. Henderson leveraged it skillfully in court, presenting it as undeniable proof of my stability, my strong earning potential, and my capacity to provide for the children. It countered any claim that leaving Ohio was an act of abandonment. Rather, it was a sound business decision. Sharon, meanwhile, tried to maintain a facade of normalcy for Billy and Susie. She'd picked them up from Linda's, her smile too wide, her voice a little too cheerful. But her life was unraveling, and the strain showed. I heard from Linda that Sharon was often distracted, her temper quick to flare. Mitch Anderson made his final definitive withdrawal. He sent a terse email to Sharon, copied to his lawyer, stating that their continued association was causing irreparable damage to his career and his own marriage. He was done. The silence from him must have been deafening. Then Henderson dropped another bomb. During discovery, his team uncovered a hidden asset Sharon had attempted to conceal, a substantial sum transferred to a separate, undisclosed account in her sister's name, just weeks before I filed. It wasn't a huge amount, but it was enough to solidify the judge's growing impression of her dishonesty. This blatant attempt to hide money further damaged her credibility in the eyes of the court. Linda, feeling the immense weight of her sister's actions and the pressure of her own conscience, began to provide Henderson with information. Not directly, but through veiled suggestions, quiet admissions about Sharon's erratic behavior, her spending habits, her emotional state. It was clear she was torn, but her loyalty to the children, and perhaps a deep-seated sense of right and wrong, pushed her to help. I thought about my biggest business success, a risky demolition contract I'd taken on years ago, buying out a competitor's failing bid on a hazardous site. Everyone said it was impossible, too dangerous, too complex. But I'd seen an angle, a precise method, and I'd executed it perfectly. It paid off immensely, making me financially powerful, securing my future. That success, that methodical approach to dismantling a complex structure, informed my current strategy. I was taking Sharon's life apart piece by piece, not with malice, but with surgical precision. Sharon faced mounting legal bills, her credit cards maxing out, her support network diminishing. Old friends, once quick to offer comfort, now kept their distance. The scandal was too public, too messy. She grew increasingly isolated, her phone calls to me desperate, then furious, then simply sad. The court, seeing the escalating conflict and the clear distress it was causing, appointed a guardian ad litem for Billy and Susie. This independent voice, a legal representative specifically for the children's welfare, would investigate and report directly to the judge. It was a good sign for me. Despite my anger, I made sure Billy and Susie were shielded from the nastier aspects of the divorce. I kept my conversations with them about school, their friends, their hobbies. I never spoke ill of Sharon in front of them, no matter how much she provoked me. They stayed with Linda most of the time, and I made sure my visits were consistent, calm, and predictable. Sharon's lawyer, grasping at straws, subtly brought up my past mistake, attempting to paint me as a hypocrite. He alluded to a financial misjudgment, a bad partnership. I met his gaze calmly. "Yes," I admitted, my voice steady. "I made a poor decision in a business venture years ago. It cost me a lot of money and taught me a valuable lesson. I admitted my fault, learned from it, and worked twice as hard to build a stable future, precisely so I could provide for my family. My subsequent track record shows a consistent effort to be responsible and provide stability." It was a direct, honest admission that disarmed his attack. The judge, listening to the guardian ad litem's early reports and the mounting evidence, expressed concern over Sharon's instability and her financial irresponsibility. It was clear the tide was turning. Then came the preliminary ruling. Temporary custody of Billy and Susie was awarded to me. It was a significant win, giving me crucial leverage and a quiet sense of vindication. This entire process has been a hard lesson for everyone involved, a harsh mirror reflecting choices and consequences. Stick around to the end to see how life's costly choices unfold. With temporary physical custody granted, I moved Billy and Susie into my apartment. It was a modest place, but clean and quiet. Their initial days were tough. Billy missed his friends, and Susie asked for her old room, for the familiar smells of home. There were tears, outbursts, and a quiet sadness that hung in the air. But I was there consistently. I cooked them dinner, helped with homework, read bedtime stories. Slowly, painstakingly, they began to find comfort in the new routine, in my steady presence. Sharon was granted supervised visitation, a supervised hour twice a week at a neutral location. It was a stark blow to her hopes for full custody, a clear indication of how the court viewed her stability. She would sit across from the children, her face drawn, trying to engage them, but the forced nature of the visits was palpable. My initial surge of raw anger, the drive for what I'd thought of as revenge, had begun to subside. It was replaced by something quieter, heavier. This wasn't about punishing Sharon anymore. It was about protecting Billy and Susie, giving them the stability they deserved, and rebuilding my own life, piece by piece. The bitterness lingered, a dull ache, but the sharp edges had softened. Linda, seeing Sharon's decline firsthand, made genuine attempts to offer support. She'd call, she'd visit, she'd try to talk sense into her, but Sharon was too proud, too bitter. She lashed out at Linda, refusing sympathy, pushing away the very help she needed. The chasm between the sisters deepened. Sharon's legal team, despite the temporary ruling, appealed. They clung to the hope of overturning the decision, prolonging the ordeal, draining both sides further. It meant more paperwork, more hearings, more waiting. I thought back to one of my toughest jobs in the mines, a few years after I'd returned from the Army. It was a new shaft, unstable, prone to rockfalls. There was a section where the support beams were rotting, threatening to collapse the entire tunnel. I was the one who had to go in, set the charges, bring it down safely. One wrong move, one misplaced calculation, and it could have meant death for me or for the men working above. I'd had to make a split-second decision, a choice between a safer, slower method that risked total collapse or a faster, more dangerous one that offered a higher chance of success but zero margin for error. I chose the latter, executed it perfectly, and walked out alive, the tunnel cleared. That experience had forged something in me, a capacity for making hard, unpopular choices, knowing they were the right ones. Mitch Anderson, once the confident professional, was facing his own reckoning. The scandal had spread far beyond our small town. He lost his job. His reputation was in tatters. His wife, I heard, had filed for divorce. His life, once so assured, had crumbled, a testament to the unforeseen consequences of his choices. Sharon's financial situation became dire. Her legal bills mounted, her savings dwindled. The house, our marital home, was now a burden. Linda mentioned it to me, hesitantly, that Sharon was even considering selling her childhood home, the small bungalow her parents had left her. A flicker of something close to pity sparked within me, a ghost of the man I used to be, but it was quickly extinguished by the cold resentment that had become my constant companion. She had made her bed. Then a critical piece of evidence surfaced. During a final sweep of electronic records, Henderson's team uncovered old emails, not from months ago but from years ago, between Sharon and Mitch. They were planning their future, talking about leaving me, about how they would manage their lives together. The dates were undeniable, predating my mistake, the financial misjudgment I had made, by a significant margin. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. My perceived mistake had been a red herring, a convenient excuse. This wasn't a reaction to my fault. It was a premeditated betrayal, carefully planned, executed while I was building a life, a family, a home. The weight of steel pressed down on me, not the steel of the mines, but the cold, hard reality of her deception. The final court hearing was set. The date loomed, a definitive and likely devastating resolution for Sharon. There would be no more appeals, no more delays. The final court proceedings began, the air in the courtroom thick with tension. The new evidence, those old emails between Sharon and Mitch, planning their future years ago, dominated everything. They were stark, undeniable proof of a long-term deception, a calculated unraveling that had nothing to do with my earlier mistake. Sharon's lawyer, a different, less experienced attorney now, struggled to defend against the premeditated nature of the affair. He tried to argue it was a fantasy, harmless talk, but the details in the emails, the specific plans for finances, for living arrangements, painted a different picture. It was cold, deliberate. I sat there, my demeanor calm, calculated. My arguments, delivered through Henderson, were precise, unyielding. I wasn't speaking in anger anymore, but with the cold clarity of a man who had seen through a long lie. This was about facts, about proving a pattern of instability and dishonesty. Billy and Susie's guardian ad litem testified next. Her report was thorough, unbiased. She spoke of my consistent presence, the children's settled routine in my home, my reliable provision. She spoke of Sharon's emotional volatility during visitations, her inconsistent schedule, her financial struggles. Her recommendation was clear. Dale Miller for permanent legal and physical custody. As the guardian ad litem concluded, Sharon erupted. She began to cry, then to sob, loud, uncontrollable wails that filled the courtroom. She accused everyone, the judge, the guardian, me, even her own lawyer, of conspiring against her. It was a complete emotional breakdown, raw and unfiltered. It shattered any remaining shred of credibility she had. Linda was called to testify. She walked to the stand, her face pale, her hands visibly trembling. She looked at Sharon, then at me, her eyes filled with a painful conflict. She confirmed details that supported my narrative. Sharon's erratic behavior, her secretive phone calls, her spending. Each answer was a hesitant, quiet confirmation that drove another nail into Sharon's case. She was torn between loyalty to her sister and the undeniable truth she had witnessed. I thought back to my emotional state after my mistake, that bad business deal. I had been devastated, not just by the financial loss, but by the disappointment I felt in myself. I remembered the earnest attempts I'd made to reconcile with Sharon, to rebuild trust. I had bought her flowers, taken her on weekend trips, poured all my energy into being a better husband, a more secure provider. I had genuinely believed she was hurting too, that we were in this together, working through a tough time. The flashback highlighted the profound unfairness, the manipulation I had endured, believing I was at fault when she was already planning her exit. Mitch Anderson was called to testify. He came in looking gaunt, his shoulders slumped. He took the stand, but when questioned about the specifics of his affair with Sharon, he refused to implicate her further. He simply stated, "I have nothing more to add." He chose silence, perhaps a last desperate act of protection, or simply a desire to escape the entire mess. The judge, after a brief recess, returned with the verdict. His voice was firm, unequivocal. He granted me full legal and physical custody of Billy and Susie. He cited Sharon's documented infidelity, her long-term deception, her financial irresponsibility, and her demonstrated emotional instability in court. Sharon was awarded minimal alimony, just enough to get by for a short period, and a fraction of the marital assets, essentially leaving her financially ruined. I felt a bittersweet victory. The revenge was complete. The scales had been balanced, the luscious exposed. But the cost was immense. My family was shattered. My children had gone through a trauma no child should ever face. The satisfaction was quickly overshadowed by a deep, pervasive sense of weariness, a moral exhaustion. Sharon, reeling from the verdict, spiraled downwards. She lost her job at the local boutique. Her connections to the community, already frayed, evaporated entirely. She became a pariah, a cautionary tale whispered in grocery store aisles. I watched from a distance, through Linda's updates, the initial satisfaction fading into a hollow ache. The price wasn't just Sharon's. I had paid it too, in the loss of my trust, in the erosion of my innocence, in the quiet sorrow that would forever linger in the corners of my heart. The ground had been shaken, and nothing would ever be truly stable again. The dust, literal and metaphorical, began to settle. My life narrowed, focused entirely on Billy and Susie. We moved into a small house I bought, a place with a yard and a quiet street. I painted their rooms, built them a tree house, and filled their lives with routines and stability. Dinners were at 6, homework by 7, stories before bed. Weekends were for the park, for fishing trips, for building model airplanes. Slowly, painstakingly, the children began to heal. Billy's quiet withdrawal eased. His laugh returned, louder, more frequent. Susie still had her moments, but the nightmares faded, replaced by dreams of adventures. They weren't whole yet, but they were thriving, finding their footing in this new, consistent world I built for them. Sharon disappeared from the immediate community. I heard through Linda that she'd moved out of state, unable to face the judgment, the whispers, the consequences of her choices. It was a clean break, a silent retreat. Linda reconnected, tentatively at first, primarily to see her niece and nephew. Our relationship was strained but civil. She brought cookies, shared stories, and became a consistent, if sometimes sorrowful, presence in the children's lives. We rarely spoke of Sharon, the unspoken agreement hanging between us like a heavy drape. My demolition business expanded. The Wyoming project led to others, bigger and more complex. I found a new purpose in the methodical destruction and rebuilding, a quiet sense of achievement in shaping the landscape, in bringing order to chaos. It was honest work, and it paid well, securing the future for my children. Then, an anonymous letter arrived. Typed, no return address, just a P.O. box from a town an hour away. It detailed Sharon's increasingly dire situation. A job lost, mounting debts, living in a cheap motel. The writer, a concerned community member, expressed fear for her safety, hinting at desperation. I remembered a moment years ago, a summer evening before the kids were born. Sharon and I were at a county fair, the lights bright, the air thick with the smell of popcorn and diesel. We rode the Ferris wheel, slow and high, overlooking the whole town, her head resting on my shoulder, her hand in mine. It was a moment of pure, uncomplicated joy, a vision of a future that felt boundless. Now, that memory felt tainted, distant, a relic from a different life. I grappled with the morality of my actions. Had I gone too far? Had the pursuit of justice, the need to level the playing field, become something else, something darker? I reflected on the concept of paying the price. And Sharon had paid, certainly. Mitch had paid, but I realized with a quiet ache that everyone involved, in their own way, had paid too. The children, most of all. Mitch Anderson, I heard, was still in town, a shadow of his former self. I saw him once years later at the hardware store. He was loading bags of concrete into an old pickup truck, his clothes faded, his movements slow. Our eyes met across the aisle of fasteners. There was no anger, no accusation, just a silent acknowledgement of the destruction they both contributed to. He nodded, a barely perceptible dip of his chin, and I returned it. Then we turned away, the moment passing, leaving only the quiet hum of the fluorescent lights. Billy and Susie, as they grew, occasionally asked about their mother. "Where's Mom?" Susie would ask, her brow furrowed. "Will she ever come back?" I would answer carefully, truthfully, but without malice. "Your mom is living somewhere else now," I'd say, my voice gentle. "She loves you very much, but she needed to be in a different place." It was enough for them, for now. Sharon's former home, the marital house, went into foreclosure. It sat empty, the lawn overgrown, a physical monument to what had been lost. I saw the signs, the bank notices. It was a difficult decision, but I made it. I secretly arranged for a community organization, one that rehabilitated properties for low-income families. To purchase it, I made sure the funds were anonymous, that no one knew it was me. It was a quiet act of grace, a way to prevent it from falling into disrepair, from becoming another ugly scar on the landscape. The decision left me with a complex mix of peace and unresolved grief. The cycle of destruction had ended. I had rebuilt my own foundations, and the children were safe. But the quiet ache, the phantom limb of a life that once was, remained. Years folded into each other, a quiet succession of seasons and milestones. Billy was a tall, gangly 17. His intellect sharp, his humor dry, much like my own, but softened by Sharon's easy laugh. He was a good student, focused, already looking at engineering programs. Susie, 15, had her mother's spark, her artistic eye, but grounded by a thoughtful resilience. They were well-adjusted, loved, and carried themselves with a quiet confidence that was a testament to the stability we had built. My demolition business had flourished. I'd established a reputation for integrity and efficiency, taking on larger, more complex projects across several states. I'd hired local talent, paid fair wages, and built a respected life, not just for myself, but for the community that surrounded us. The house I'd bought for us was a home, filled with the scent of dinner, the sound of teenage banter, and the comfortable clutter of lives lived fully. The sharp edge of anger had long since dulled. I'd learned to forgive not as an act of absolution for Sharon, but as a release for myself. Holding on to that bitterness only chained me to the past, preventing me from fully embracing the present with my children. For their sake, and for my own peace, I let it go. Then, after almost a decade of silence, Sharon reached out. She contacted Linda, a hesitant email, then a phone call. She was in a different state, working a steady job, sober, living a quiet life. She wanted to know about the children. She expressed a desire for a slow, cautious reconciliation. Linda, ever the mediator, relayed Sharon's plea to me. I listened, my face neutral. I took my time, weeks even, weighing the years of absence against the possibility of healing. I saw the children, growing into adults, their curiosity about their mother, an occasional, unspoken question in their eyes. Ultimately, I allowed it. Supervised contact once a month, phone calls twice a month. It was a cautious re-entry on their terms and mine. Looking back, the raw intensity of my actions, once fueled by betrayal and a sense of righteous indignation, now felt different. I saw that my revenge, though born of anger, had ultimately served to protect my children. It had removed them from an unstable environment, from the lies and case, and provided them with a foundation they desperately needed. My perspective on the past had shifted. No longer a tale of vengeance, but one of survival and calculated defense. I remembered the day I met Sharon at that 4th of July picnic. The vibrant colors, the smell of barbecue, her easy smile. She was light, carefree, a burst of summer in my structured world. I saw it now through the lens of experience, a time of innocence lost, both hers and mine. That youthful hope, untainted by the harsh realities of life, was a precious, fleeting thing. I accepted that some scars never fully heal. The faint ache of a broken trust, the shadow of what might have been, remained. But life moved forward, carrying its lessons, its new joys, its quiet moments of grace. Billy and Susie cautiously navigated their new relationship with their mother. There were no grand reunions, no immediate forgiveness. It was a slow, tentative process, tempered by years of absence, by the independent lives they had built with me. They were kind, respectful, but also guarded. It was their journey, and I let them walk it at their own pace. My own heart, long closed off, had also begun to open. I found companionship in a woman named Sarah, a quiet strength, a shared understanding of life's complexities. She was kind, patient, and her presence brought a gentle warmth to my home, a quiet comfort I hadn't realized I was missing. I reflected on the true meaning of family. It wasn't just blood, not anymore. It was the choices made, the love given, the unwavering presence in one. It was the messy, imperfect tapestry woven from years of commitment and quiet dedication. I often stood on my porch, watching Billy and Susie play basketball in the driveway, their laughter echoing in the evening air. It was a quiet moment of Midwestern resolve, a deep, abiding hope that transcended the past. I understood then that while betrayal could take everything, strength and forgiveness could eventually build something new, something stronger. The moral consequences were clear. Choices had prices, yes, often heavy ones, but sometimes paying that price led to unexpected growth, to a profound rebuilding of the self. I carried the past, the lessons learned, the scars earned, but I was no longer defined by it. I was a man rebuilt from the ruins, standing on new horizons, looking forward.